Hello, and welcome to episode 70 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast, RIP for Magic the Gathering, for the casual spike, focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies in Modern and Pioneer before they died with the rest of Magic. My name is Stanislav, alive in Chicago.
Sam, why are you so negative today?
Wow. You've been reading Twitter?
I've been on Twitter.
Oh, boy.
With me on the line from Denver, Singapore, it's the one and only Shane Beeps.
Yeah, I had to get some VPN shenanigans going so I could download a mobile game client that's not available in the States yet. So it's me in Denver, Singapore.
Also with us, the Godfather, Dave Harburger.
You know, Singapore is a lovely place, actually. A city of malls is how I feel about Singapore.
You know what else I feel about Singapore? Happy birthday, Shane.
Yeah. Oh man, I turned 40 this weekend, and I already received a lovely present from the two of you. I got my fanny pack, or as Emma would say, a bum bag. I immediately looked at how many deck boxes I could fit in there. It's three boulders. I'm good to go.
That's amazing. That looked like a well-structured fanny pack, too. I think Stan really helped pick out a good one.
It is beefy. Like the buckle is like a backpack, like durable style buckle. It has like a mesh fabric, like where it goes against your body, like to keep sweat down. It is high end.
It goes against your body.
Yeah. Performance fanny
bum
pack.
bag.
Yeah. Well, Shane, as we know, there are other presents coming. I really would like to tell you what they are, but we're just going to let the chips fall where they may as far as what shows up.
Is it a box of Ikoria you got from the distributor?
Shut up.
Dun, 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 dun.
On this week's episode,
what?
Wow.
on this week's episode, we break down some devastating results from the weekend's Magic Online events. Then we dive into red-green midrange in Modern and talk about what the word Ponza really means.
To us.
But first, some housekeeping.
Thank you to new patrons. We have 4 new citizens of the Dive Down Nation this week. Quote unquote, don't read this name. Is that what that entry said?
It did. And I felt like we should respect that request.
Okay. Anonymous, thank you. Matt W., Tanner W., and Keith W. So the W brothers all got in big, sounds like.
Thanks for showing up, W's.
Perfect.
Also, huge thanks to Jimbo for moving up a few tiers in their Patreon support. Always means the world to us.
In the world of our podcast reviews, we haven't had a new review in a few weeks. So if you use Apple Podcasts or maybe some other place that you can review podcasts, head into those apps, leave us some stars if you can, maybe a text review. That helps people find us, makes us feel really good about ourselves. So if you have something to say, let us know.
As always, if you'd like to support the show directly, you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. We've got some new Patreon perks shipping out fairly soon, like in the next couple weeks, or at least the ones that I'm responsible for. I'll do that in the next week or two.
Way to be a team player.
It's a lot of packaging.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, throw everybody else under the bus. The stuff I'm responsible for will get done.
Look, I'm just trying to avoid going out in public for now, but it's getting to the point now where I can just go like at 11 a.m. and probably avoid the crowds.
You know what's hard is I have to print shipping labels, and I used to just do that at work.
Oh man.
I would just steal paper and inkjet printing from work. What do I do now?
I have a laser jet at home.
You have a laser jet?
I do have a laser jet.
And you haven't scrapped it for parts?
It's a jet made of lasers.
Sweet.
But yeah, send me the labels. I'll print them and then I'll leave them somewhere. Well, do an anonymous drop location where we don't, a no contact drop, as they say these days.
All right. Sounds good.
Leave it in a geocache.
Mm-hmm.
We're also brought to you in part by Mana Traders. And again, this week, I'm loving Mana Traders. I'm just loading up deck lists. And even with everyone at home right now playing a lot of Magic Online, I thought my rents were really fast this week. I think they're reinvesting a lot of what they're getting. There's they have like a sea of Mana Traders bots on there, like moving cards around. I think it's working better than ever, and I'm enjoying it more than ever. So if you want to get 15% off your first 3 months of Mana Traders, if you're not in the know of what Mana Traders is, it lets you rent Magic Online cards instead of buying them. And by using code THEDIVEDOWN, all one word, when you sign up, you get that 15% off for 3 months, and you help us out a little bit.
Thanks, Shane, and thank you, listeners. And also a preemptive thank you to David, who did the breakdown this week.
Welcome to the breakdown. It's my house this week. So this week we decided that since the deck we're going to talk about is in Modern this week for the dive down, we'd cover a Pioneer event. It was going to be a big weekend since Ikoria was just released and people just got their hands on the cards for the first time, but it seemed kind of quiet to me. I don't know about you guys. Nothing noteworthy seemed to happen as a result of these new cards, but let's kind of take a look at this event anyway. And
a lot of same old.
Definitely. Yeah. So the event we're looking at is the Pioneer Super Qualifier from April 18th. And let's start with the top 8. In first place, Lala Uuba with Boros Burn-ish.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
With Luris. It's a port from Modern, kind of. Modern Burn list. Let's look through the top 4, and then we can kind of come back a little bit.
Okay.
In second place was a friend of the show, Yama Killer, Gal Schlesinger, with Gruul Aggro with Obosh. And it looks kind of like a port from a Ponza, or maybe an update of earlier aggro lists with only odd-numbered cards. I don't know why there'd be only odd-numbered cards in here. It's kind of weird. Really cool that there are cards like Slaughterhorn in here as a potential combat trick, and Creator's Claws in the main deck, which is, I think anytime you can have a deck that's running a Fireball and win something with it, essentially, that's pretty great. I mean, second place also gets a Pro Tour qualification, so Yama Killer queued for a Pro Tour by coming in second here.
I cast so many Creator's Claws in my heyday of Con Standard. I love seeing this card come back.
Yeah, absolutely. In third place was Team 5C with SRAM Auras, a deck that we did a dive down about a few weeks ago with Luris. This deck. You love this deck. This deck has nothing really new about it except for Luris. So let's move on. I'm sort of surprised this deck came in third place.
Don't you feel a little vindicated, though, David? Like, we put a lot of work into that dive down, and now we see the deck performing. Clearly, we know what's up, even before Luris is added.
Yeah, I mean, that card made some difference, but I still think that this deck is pretty good. I mean, if you like heroic style decks, there's always a chance that it's going to get there. This deck felt a little bit like that to me. There's nothing broken about it. And then the fourth place deck, Blue-Black Clone Tribal, an old favorite of all of ours with Garuda. And I just have no idea what this deck is. Also, this is the top 4. What the heck is going on with this top 4 for this?
Oh man, this Sultai clone deck. I mean, yeah, just kind of out of nowhere. It's weird. What happened?
Yeah, it is Sultai. My bad. Sultai Clone Tribal. Look,
this is a trade binder deck, is what this is. Spark Double, Clever Impersonator.
Is this Saffron Olive just actually spiking a tournament
against the odds?
Against the odds.
I mean, look, this is the top 4, and it was a fun bit that we all just had here, but all 4 of these decks had companions in them from Ikoria. So I guess welcome to the new world. It's very strange to see one of the first premier level tournaments after the deck after the cards became legal to have such a sea change at the top of the standings, just like that.
Well, you know what they say about these Pioneer Super Qualifiers. It's a real companion meta.
Yeah, exactly. So where's the rest of the stuff? Inverter, Sultai, Mono Whites. Well, it turns out that they're in the second half of the top 8. So in 5th place was Dimir Inverter. 6th place, the Inverter deck was piloted by NB Falco. The 6th place was Source Odin on a mono white Heliod deck that includes the Karn package now, which I think is kind of a new surprising thing to me. And multiple decks I saw in this tournament were running Karn the Great Creator in mono white. Seems like a really good mana sink, another way to kind of use all those resources that you're making. I think it's interesting as an alternate to the aggressive plan that this deck sort of defaulted into. 7th place was Oskaya with mono green walkers. Looks pretty similar to me. Not sure if you see anything different about this deck from what you usually see, Shane.
No, the Genesis Hydra isn't really like a staple yet, but it's certainly a card that people have been playing over the Voyaging Satyrs. So, and the sideboard is pretty typical. The couple Heaven to Earth to slow down those flyers from pecking down your planeswalkers. But it's pretty much stock.
Yeah, don't need those anymore in this meta because Spirits is non-existent, it turns out. And then in 8th place, there was Alira Siren with mono white. So the top 8. Oh my gosh, all the top 4 decks have companions. It's Luris, Garuda, and Obosh. To me, it kind of looked like this weird crashing of 2 metagames, old and new, together. The top half was 4 basically new decks. I mean, Saramora is an older deck, but it's kind of like a tier below everything else. And then the second half of the top 8 was pretty much standard list that we've seen.
Couple quick things.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Banned Spirits decks in 19th place, so not totally absent from the top 32. But also this novel deck that you're referring to, there was basically a mirror copy of it in 20th place, played by Bob Jackson.
Yes, the clone tribal with Garuda. Yeah,
so maybe this is a list that like people knew about somehow.
Yeah, absolutely, people did. And I think before we move on to the rest of the meta, let's talk about these new decks.
Yes.
So let's go back to decks 1 through 4 because obviously these companion decks are big news, and really not to give away too much, but we're going to spend a good amount of time talking about them before we get to Ponza in the breakdown or in the dive down. So the first place deck, Lala Wuba's deck, running Luris of the Dream Den out of the sideboard as their companion. In case you forgot what this card does, it is a 3/2 lifelink cat nightmare. That's companion restriction is each permanent card in your starting deck has converted mana cost 2 or less. Salient points with Luris, because we're going to be talking about this a lot, is that it only restricts your permanents. And not your spells. Keep that in mind. It has lifelink, as I mentioned, and then the other activated ability it has is during each of your turns, you may cast 1 permanent spell with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard.
It's card advantage, baby.
It's just a card advantage thing in black-white for some reason. So this deck essentially is a burn deck, right? It's running a bunch of 1 and 2 drops.
Hybrid black-white.
Yeah.
This goes into any deck that converts out of those colors.
Exactly. It goes into every deck, as we're going to discover in a little bit later, but
that's also true.
Yes. So this deck is, it's filled with low creature curves. It's got Gitu Lava Runner, which is a card that I feel like is always like on the edge of being the Goblin Guide of Pioneer, basically. It's got Viashino Pyromancer, which is a card that does a little bit of extra damage to you, to your opponents when it comes into play. Light at the stage, Skewer the Critics, Boros Charm, Lightning Strike, Wild Slash, Wizard's Lightning.
Yeah, importantly for Viashino too, it also enables Wizard's Lightning, so you get that double dip there.
A couple creatures do that.
Yeah, I mean, Viashino does, Soulscar Mage does, and Lava Runner does. So it's got 12 things that enable Wizard's Lightning. Lightning Bolt in Pioneer, who wanted it?
These guys.
Stan. Yep, exactly.
So I actually played this deck. This isn't really that new. It's just not that popular for some reason, but there was a Boros burn deck with Chain to the Rocks, though I think at that point it was a main deck. Here it's in the sideboard. Like literally the week before Christmas. Mm-hmm. I don't remember if it was a 5-0 or if it was from a tournament, but the only reason I remember that is because it was Christmas morning and I was doing leagues with it. Pioneer was still new. I was excited about it then.
Well, here's why I think it might be popular now. You can cast permanents out of your graveyard that are less than 2 CMC over and over again if you lose them with our new friend Luris. Just a thought.
Is that Luris of the Dream Den?
It is Luris of the Dream Den.
Ah, yes. Love her.
Here's what I want to know. How did a nightmare get to sleep in the Dream Den? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Is Luris the big cat or that little kitten in the art?
Oh, man. Good question. I think it's both. That's what's amazing about it. There's some real looper stuff going on there. Second place, Yamakiller's deck is red-green aggro, which is similar, I guess, to what Stan was just saying about the Boros burn deck, is that, Gruul aggro has been kind of a deck that's on the edges of being good enough in Pioneer. A lot of times we felt like it came down to the fact that the mana was really bad. But guess what? When you have Obosh the Prey Piercer in your sideboard as your companion, and what Obosh does is it's 3 hybrid red-black. Its restriction is your starting deck contains only cards with odd converted mana costs and land cards. And then it says, if a source you control with an odd converted mana cost would deal damage to a permanent or player, it does double that damage.
Double damage. And you thought that Torben was good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Who's Torben?
He's no Obosh.
He's not your daddy's companion.
Yeah. I mean, and this deck, there's huge threats in here that are evasive and that can suddenly deal double damage. Let's talk about, for example, Steel Leaf Champion, which all of a sudden deals 10.
Seems okay.
Seems okay.
I really wish I could get a Questing Beast in this deck.
Too bad. 4 CMC.
Ronus is good. This can't run Surak, can it? Or can't? It was like, isn't Surak 5 or Surak 4?
Surak is 4, I think.
Oh, too bad. Too bad, Surak. Yeah, he's 4. Surak would be incredible in this deck. Surak, the Hunt Caller.
Yeah. So, red-green, Obosh doubles some damage. You always can play it on turn 5 if you want to, after you've played giant beaters on turn 3 and turn 4. Closing power, I think is what they call that. Third place is the SRAM Auras deck that we talked about. That one is running Luris of the Dream Den in the sideboard as well. And guess what? In a deck that has powerful threats, but that can be quite fragile, being able to replay them, rebuy them from the graveyard is a pretty good way to bring your deck back after it's taken some damage or taken some removal early in the game.
Yeah, like what we talked about in our dive down was how challenging it was to play against removal-based decks. And this just invalidates so much 1-for-1 removal if you can stick a late game Luris in some way and then just get a lot of value off it. It's otherworldly.
Yeah, and the huge part here is it gets back both the creatures and the enablers.
Yes.
So the burn deck, it just gets back the creatures basically. But in this deck, you can, if you need enchantment, if you need a buff, get it. If you need a creature, get it. If you need SRAM to draw some cards, go ahead and get it.
Yeah, you could rebuild a board so quickly from this.
Yeah.
Like if they're just, they're stuck, they're top decking, you ran them out of removal, and then you play a Luris, you can get access to 6, 7, 8 cards, probably pretty darn easily, and just go to town.
And then the fourth place deck, which is maybe the most hard to discern and probably the deck that caused one of the biggest buzzes on Twitter over the weekend, is the deck that I have somewhat inappropriately called Dimir Clone Tribal. That was me trying to be funny and bury the lead. But what this deck is a Garuda Doom of Depths combo deck.
Yes.
And here's what Garuda does. So Garuda is sort of the mirror image of Obosh in the sense that your deck is only allowed to have even converted mana costs if you want to play this as your companion. And then what it says is when Garuda enters the battlefield, each player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. Put a creature card with an even converted mana cost from among those cards onto the battlefield under your control.
Yes. This one not only has the companion Garuda, it also has 3 more in the deck.
Yeah, because what this deck tries to do is ramp itself into playing Garuda over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Seems good.
Essentially. And then just kill you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's different kill conditions. I've seen one that had Thassa's Oracle in it, kind of like a self-mill kind of thing. It looks like this one that came in 4th place is trying to kill with some kind of combination of just a big 6/6 and Dragon Lord Kolaghan, which is a pretty interesting card to have because it gives other creatures that you control haste, but also has flying and haste itself. So you can make a big army of big cards and then just kind of swing in for a bunch of damage. I have not played against this deck yet, but boy, did this deck lead to some problems already over the weekend.
Yeah, I saw some board states that were just absurd. Just 10, 12 copies of man, what the heck's that card's name? I've already lost it.
Garuda?
Garuda? Yeah, Obosh is cool too, though. I mean, clone him, yeah.
I really like the Godzilla card.
Yeah.
This one. Gigan, Cyberclaw.
Cyberclaw Terror.
Yeah, so and of course, I think most people who listen to our show probably follow things close enough to know that Garuda was basically insta-banned on Magic Online in all formats because it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. It started out with a ban in Legacy, and then they banned it in the middle of a Pioneer PTQ.
Isn't that insane?
Yes.
I found it also interesting they used the word like banned, which made it sound much more final than it was. It should have been like it's a temporary ban while we fix it. Like the messaging was not great.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my understanding is that they banned it because it works not as well as it should.
Hold on, you're kidding me.
Because right now, if you read Garuda, even if the cards are exiled off of its comes into play trigger, you can select one of the cards that were milled from it and put it into play. So basically, you should be able to play this card through Rest in Peace and Leyline of the Void. And right now in Magic Online, you can not.
Oh my gosh.
And so I think that might be fixed by the time the show airs, but it's fascinating to me that they shut it all down because of that. Amazingly, it's not the only companion that was bugged on Magic Online. Apparently, Luris has bugs with it where it lets you cast cards, X cards specifically, for casting costs above 2, which it should not be able to do right now. So, for example, if you want to try to cast a Walking Ballista for 4 generic mana, it will do that. It should not be able to do that. And other fun things. But anyway, I think that's a side note. Hopefully that's all fixed by the time the show airs.
Do you know off the top of your head, did this tournament happen before they temp banned Garuda?
It did. Yeah, I think this was an event that fully fired. Then there was a legacy event that was going to happen that they canceled, I think. And then there was a Pioneer PTQ or qualifier that was going on that was in the 4th round, and they just shut it down.
Right, and refunded everyone.
They refunded everybody. They paid out prizes based on the number of wins they had when the event ended as well.
Cool.
Yeah, the response to that was not super happy.
Nope. Twitter was on fire.
Huh.
On fire.
Yeah. Warm to the touch, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, when I touch the app, the little tile on my phone, I got a burn. I got a 2nd-degree burn on my thumb. From all the hot takes.
It's feverish in there, and not because of a global pandemic.
Exactly. All right, so let's zoom through the rest of this event because I want to save some time for discussion, and also we don't want to take too much away from the dive down section. But 9th through 16th was a little more stable. There was kind of a mix of, it was basically 8 different decks, 7 different decks. There were 2 mono red Obosh decks, and then kind of a bunch of greatest hits from where Pioneer was before these cards were released. And then there was a Hardened Scales Luris deck and a Hardened Scales non-Luris deck. So maybe there was really 6 decks. Sorry to keep knocking that down. It's interesting to see another red aggro deck with Luris in one spot, and then a red aggro deck with Obosh in a different spot. I think they're both pretty cool. Obviously, there's the benefits to both of the different cards, but those seem to be 2 of the most popular ones that keep popping up in Pioneer right now, at least. The other thing that was really interesting in this bracket of the tournament is that the 10th place deck, the Scales deck, had no new cards. It didn't have the, I forget the name of the 1 mana artifact from Ikoria that Stan spoiled last week, the one that moves counters around. It didn't have that legendary one in it.
Obelisk or Obsidat.
Not the Obsidat. Yeah. Well, it didn't have that in it. It didn't have any new cards in it, but it still managed to come in 10th place. It's kind of a deck from Pioneer's infancy. And then in the 17th through 32nd bracket was really a huge mix. You know, there was a chunky red deck. There was a Bant Spirits deck. There were 2 Lotus Breach decks, Mono Black aggro, Golgari aggro. There's a bunch of random stuff here. If you look at the breakdown of the entire metagame of the top 32 of this event, didn't feel like there was a lot of consensus. The biggest deck, actually, in my mind, was the sort of like red chunky to aggro spectrum. There were 5 decks that kind of fit within that. Some of those had Obosh, some of them didn't have Obosh, one had Luris. You know, they're all different decks, I know, but those were the kind of like red decks of different persuasions. Let's say your Monastery Swift Spear / Soulscar Mage decks. The next group that I saw was 4 mono white Devotion, 4 mono green Walkers. So those are your kind of like Nykthos-y decks. The Inverter was next with 3. Sramoris had 2 entries. Scales had 2 entries. Sultai had 1. It all felt kind of random after that. The punchline here is that for as much as we just talked about companions, in this particular event, they didn't totally dominate the event.
Take it back.
There were 9 decks in the top 32, so it was a little over 25% had companions. But this was also very early in the weekend. And we have a whole bunch of evidence to show that things are going a different way. And so I felt like this was an interesting kind of like tournament to look at because it was the start.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing like a high value tournament, you're probably more likely to play a deck that you're comfortable with or think has legs. And you're not immediately going to jump to one of these companion decks unless you're some of these gutsy people where it paid off.
Yeah, and keep in mind that, so this tournament, I think I said it was on the 18th. It's actually on the 17th, so it was on Friday. By the time the weekend went on, things had very much changed. So let me give you some notes about what we learned about on Twitter. First thing is, Austin Yost, who is an SCG grinder, I believe, had posted a very interesting tweet on Sunday morning that said that during this week, 8 of the 10 companions had made a top 8 of a premier MTGO event in a legal constructed format. That sounds weird, but what that means is that of those new companion cards, 8 of them top 8'd in Pioneer or Legacy or Modern or Vintage or Standard within the first weekend of being released.
Sick.
Yeah.
Seems good.
Brian Gottlieb put a little bit of a finer point on it. He shared a tweet on Monday morning, Brian Gottlieb of Arena Deck Lists, of course, that said companions took first and second in the Vintage Challenge, first through fourth in the Legacy Challenge. They were the entire top 8 of the Modern Challenge last weekend, including, Shane, you counted it, 7 Luris decks in the top 8.
Yes, 7 Luris decks.
And 1 Yorion deck. They took first through fourth place in the Pioneer Challenge and 6 of 8 slots in the top 8 of the Standard Challenge.
Good look.
We could go on and on. People are talking about this. There's all kinds of cases for and against this, but let's give the fans what they're tuned in for. Team, they want our takes on companion. You know they do. Let's give it to them. I'm going to give the floor to Shane first.
Okay. I'm not going to be overtly like just hard negative on this because one, I think that we don't have enough experience with them. I think that, when we first saw like Stormforge Mystic get unbanned, what we saw like 30 odd decks show up in the first deck dump with Stoneforge, right? And we've seen her taper off and trickle into being not even super relevant right now, I think, and even in the banned control decks that we see in Modern, right? So sure, one thing is like this is like a hot new thing. People want to test these things out. But also, like we said last week or the week before, is that this is just effectively an 8th card in your starting hand. So that alone, combined with some of the power level and their effects on the game, makes it very compelling to try to move towards running a companion in your deck. And if you don't like change in your game and you don't like the way that companion plays out, or you don't like the sort of commander-esque vibe it provides to the game, then you might be initially turned off, especially because it's showing up so frequently and performing and perhaps overperforming right now.
I mean, I think that this is such a resounding sort of case that it's very, very, very hard for me to believe that this is not going to have to be walked back somehow with either some kind of intervention eventually, but maybe we'll set that aside for a second. I mean, after playing a little bit with companions, it's super powerful. Just that idea of knowing one card that's going to be quote unquote in your hand and that your opponent cannot interact with via Thoughtseize essentially is wild. It's super wild. It's beyond, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about, how much drawing a free card was worth, how much card selection is really worth, when the Once Upon a Time discussion. And this is just that times 20. It's like, you always know you're going to have Luris. You always know you're going to have it. It's going to be available to you when you play your third land every time. Now, they're all creatures, so they can die. That makes a difference, but it's really something. Stan, what do you think so far?
I'm frustrated because I don't want to buy 4 cards. I have to buy 7 now, like just one of each companion. The playset wasn't enough. I think that is a bridge too far.
Well, Stan, I know in our conversations this week, I think you're of the opinion that people are being a little bit too hasty in being a little bit over the top in their response.
Oh yeah, I do think a lot of the hive mind is pretty hyperbolic with Magic, and we see that definitely happening like right now with Companion. It's a little frustrating because it's like so new, and it, for me at least, it makes it a little harder to enjoy this new thing when people have decided they hate it already. Mm-hmm. I think in some cases before even really playing with the cards. I'm trying to stay positive though, like cool new cards that I get to play. I don't have to buy a playset to know that I can cast one. I can cast one every game. That's cool.
Yeah.
And hey, we know this. I love Pokemon. So now like I have a little buddy. Why not?
See, that's like an issue for me personally. I'm not going to, stick on this too much, but I don't like the sort of flavor and performance of it as a mechanic because I don't really want to have a deck mascot.
Why not?
I just don't. Like, I don't want to have to build around a restriction based on the companion mechanic. What really the issue too is homogeneity. Like if it gets to the point where it's just stupid not to run a companion, then that's going to restrict some things.
I mean, it's certainly looking that way in Modern right now. Like literally every archetype you could think of is putting a Lurrus in the sideboard and 3 or 4 Mishra's Baubles in the deck as just a package to say like, hey, I can use Lurrus to draw a bunch of cards if in the mid game to like grind out if I run out of steam. And that was successful for a Delver deck this weekend. That was successful for Jeskai Control this weekend. That was successful for Grixis Control. That was successful for
Jund.
For Jund. Yeah, Jund's huge point there. That was successful for Hardened Scales as a deck as well. And so it's just kind of like a weird bad look when you think about it that way.
One of the issues is just the way that it provides so much advantage in the form of Lurrus, because not only is it an 8th card in your hand, it's cards like 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 in your graveyard. And I kind of compared it to Dredge very early on when I realized exactly what Lurrus especially was doing. Like when you dredge 5, you can sort of read it as draw 5, right? Like that's kind of like the shtick of Dredge, but you're getting 5 crappy Dredge cards. Like the Dredge cards on their own are not that amazing, right? But with Lurrus, when you cast a Lurrus, that could effectively be draw 8 cards from your graveyard. And it works so well because those are cards you typically want to be casting. And I know that's not effectively what it's doing, but it's like that if it survives for any length of time.
Yeah.
I, for one, hope they print more companions. I like that 7 out of 8 companions already seem good. I want more companions because now you get to open any companion in a pack and be like, hey, I get to probably play this card if I want to build around it. I don't need to necessarily buy 3 more copies unless it's Cyberclaw, the new flavor of White Claw. And I don't know, give me more. It's almost like the new Planeswalker, except it's maybe not quite as good as a Planeswalker or better than a Planeswalker.
I think it's way better than a Planeswalker, to be honest.
Yeah, I just really don't want to go down that road.
I am not a big fan of some people get to play with an extra card in their opening hands and some people don't vibe of this.
I think the vibe of this is that coupled with some of the recent history in MTG is cards are just going to keep getting better and better. And I think we have to get used to that.
I'd love to talk about that for a second.
Sure.
So here's the thing. I think you're totally right about that. And while I do think that the companions are going to get banned, and maybe it's as a mechanic, I think there's an outside shot that they just say that the companion mechanic is banned. And the cards are all fine on their own, and maybe people get to play their Garuda combo deck, and that is what it is. And maybe some deck settles on Sramoris decides I want to have Lurrus in my deck still, like I think that that's the thing. But the point is, this is all intentional. I think people keep acting like these are mistakes. Mm-hmm. Like they go, how could Wizards let this through? It's so clearly a mistake. It's not a mistake. Like this is what they're doing to exert innovation across all of their formats all the time and make people be engaged. And I think that to do that. They're making powerful cards. Powerful cards are exciting. People want to talk about them. The controversy of saying stuff is broken generates interest, but it also generates fun gameplay for a certain amount of time. And then they ban them, and that sucks. But I do think it's intentional. I'm not sure I don't want to get into the whole like monetary part of that because that's such a difficult thing. But I do think that this is intentional.
I'm not sure. I think the kind of like the all press is good press, like all eyes on our game is a good thing, which seems to be what Wizards is sort of counting on these days, is a great idea. I think that having like a significant amount of negative sentiment surrounding your game and like questioning your game design abilities is not necessarily a great idea.
That was going to happen no matter what.
I don't think that's true though. But also, Stan, you're saying that they're just good cards, but it's not just that they're good cards. It's that it's a very good mechanic that forces people to play with them, that may force people to play with the mechanic or fall behind in power level. And we've had 27 years of Magic not revolving around a Commander-esque theme for our standard constructed sets and the way that we play in our eternal standard constructed sets and formats rather, is that to make people think that they have to do it or fall behind, or it homogenizes like around 7 of the top 8 playing Luris or not winning. It's just not where I want to be playing personally. And so it's not just the fact that these cards are good, because we're all dealing with good cards for the last 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, right? It's the fact that this entire idea is too good.
I do agree with that. I have one last thing to say before we leave the breakdown, and that is I am officially updating the status of mtgbandswhen.com. I'm moving to DEF CON 3.
Whoa.
For the companions, and we'll see where it goes from there.
What's the DEF CON scale?
I'm talking about War Games. It's probably a movie you never saw.
No.
Because it's from 10 years before you would have seen movies. But it's a good 80s movie.
It's really good.
Yeah, I'm just moving. So MTG Bandswen is green right now. I'm moving it to yellow, essentially.
Cool.
And, we'll see. I might try to add some fun interactive features on there. So go check out mtgbandswen.com for fun.
Yeah, widgets. Are you adding widgets, Dave?
I think I'm gonna try to add a poll. Honestly, someone in our Slack, Alana, asked us if we could do a poll or a Deadpool essentially for the companions. I'm gonna see if I can figure it out.
Stan, there's a really important line, very quotable from War Games, and it's the only winning move is not to play. And I hope we don't get there with this.
Would you like to play more Companions Modern, Dr. Falcon?
Can we not commit, but at least reveal that we will probably talk about Companions as a mechanic again in the future, perhaps as soon as next week's episode?
I think you should totally say that. Sure. I can say it if you want.
I think this is all going in.
Yeah. Oh, is this all going in?
This is all going in.
All right, listen, everybody. Our next week's episode is planned to be our, of course, Sleeve, Believe, Heave episode that we do for every set. I think there's a very good chance that we will do new decks in Pioneer and Modern based off of cards from Ikoria. It will be impossible to not have Companions be part of that, or probably be all of it. So don't be surprised if next week we're talking about Companions again, and each of us pilots a different Companion deck for fun and glory.
At least we don't have to repeat ourselves from this week, though, so that's good.
I think we might have some evolving viewpoints. Let's see what happens after another week.
Yeah, that's the hope, right? Let's evolve some viewpoints.
We want to learn together.
That wraps up our very controversial breakdown. Thank you guys for your very tempered and even-keeled takes. We'll take a quick break, and when we return, we're diving into Ponza. It's like a calzone, but deep fried. Stay with us. Today I get to share a sentence I never thought would be said by anyone. Let's talk about the Tier 1 Modern deck, Red-Green Ponza.
Amazing.
Also known as Gruul Midrange. 2020, what a year. Ponza. Wow. Ponza. Guys, Ponza.
I know.
This is what happens when you give too many Magic players too much time on the internet. They start playing with Ponza and they start winning.
I think this is what happens when lands get too good.
This is exactly my hypothesis as well. So we'll see. We can double back on that after we talk about the gameplay. I just want to say off the top, this episode is dedicated to friend of the show, Odin.
Longtime friend, longtime
friend and listener.
Longtime citizen of the Dive Down Nation.
I was living at my old apartment the first time I said Odin's name. I remember exactly where I was sitting because it was while we were recording the podcast, and I always sat in the same place.
All right, this one's for you, Odin. Stan, you want to give us some of the controversial history of Ponza and where the name came from? And you know what? Even if this is true, I'm still going to have my doubts about whether this is apocryphal or not. So let's see.
Yeah, so red-based land destruction decks have been around Modern for a long time. They've been around Magic forever. I believe Stone Rain was printed in Alpha.
Definitely is.
But the name Ponza is a specific way to describe a type of deck, according to my research, first appeared in 1999, in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And apparently it was at a Pro Tour qualifier for Pro Tour Rome by a player named Brian Cowell.
So Brian Cowell, definitely a longtime player. Brian Cowell still plays. I think that if I remember right, Brian Cowell is someone who is well known in the legacy and vintage scene right now, more so than some of the more recent formats. But yeah, that's a name that you will see someone who gets on Twitter and participates in Magic community stuff as well occasionally. So,
and the name of this deck, historians agree, originates from a dish, an edible dish called the Ponza Rata, served at a restaurant in Waukesha, Wisconsin, called Jimmy's Grotto. And their Ponza is a small pizza that's folded over, sealed, and then deep fried. So it's like a calzone, but it's deep fried instead of baked.
I like where this is going.
Does this remind you at all of that old like Saturday Night Live sketch that was like, pizza, now that's a taco? Did you ever see that where they're like, you take a pizza and we put tacos in it and then we put it in a bag full of chili and all this stuff? It was like a bad fast food parody.
No.
Yeah, that was our era of Saturday Night Live, Shane. I also want to update everybody. Looking at the Yelp page for Jimmy's Grotto right now, Jimmy's Grotto, 3.5 stars, seems solid. It says if you want to try the Ponza, I recommend calling 30 minutes ahead of time.
Nice. The Ponza. It's a weird pizza, and similar to this dish, this edible dish, the deck is a combination of crust, which is the land, meat, which are creatures, red sauce, which is how they describe land destruction, and ramp, which are veggies. Also, this restaurant is a 2-hour drive from our house. Dave?
I know.
As soon as we're allowed out, we're going.
Oh, yeah.
So if Outback won't sponsor us, maybe Jimmy's Grotto will.
Jimmy's Grotto, get at us. Sponsor our Magic podcast, Jimmy's Grotto. You've been part of the Magic community for 20 years. You just probably didn't know it.
We're usually not a history podcast, but because there's like some weird and notable anecdotes with Ponza in particular, I just want to mention them very quickly. The deck popped up at a very high level game in January of the year 2000 during a match between John Finkel, playing a deck which I believe was called Napster, and Chris Benefal, playing a deck called Ponza, in the finals of U.S. Nationals during Mercadian Masks Standard.
Gross. How early 2000s are those sentences right there? It was called Napster.
Versus Kazaa.
First off, we don't name Magic decks anymore. Number one, at least not after cards after arbitrary things. And then second, it's Finkel in the finals of Nationals, and it's Mercadian Masks.
Yeah. Finkel won. Also, Aaron Forsyth was in the top 8 of that event.
Yeah.
Flash forward 2016, we actually start to see a deck emerge in Modern that kind of looks and resembles what Ponza is today. during an era known as Eldrazi Winter. And it was based on a very similar foundation of Utopia, Sprawl, and Arbor Elf. Pillage, of course, at the time wasn't legal, but the deck was running Blood Moons, Stone Rain, and Moonwaldi Acid Moss. The payoffs were also a little different. Back then, people were running Inferno Titan and Storm Breath Dragon, which are big creatures that do sometimes still see play, even in Ponza today. So really quick, taking our temperatures, we all got to play this deck. What'd you guys think?
Loved it.
Loved it.
Yeah. I don't know why. Like I usually don't play red and green together. It just reminded me of a lot of different stuff that was pretty fun. Like it had a pretty aggressive plan that you could move into sometimes. It also had some kind of prison-y elements. It reminded me a little bit of when we all played Mono Red Prison for the show, where, you're doing some rampy stuff to try to get a payoff out, basically a turn or 2 turns earlier than you should. And that just kind of felt like the name of the game. And so it was cool to try to get into Blood Moon or Chandra or a piece of land destruction through a different kind of angle than what that mono red deck was all about, which was, rituals and spirit guide and stuff like that. I felt like I'm not quite sure. I mean, we're going to talk about it a lot more, but it felt like it had game in basically every match that I was in, which is really good. And in a way that like, even Jund, which people, is another modern deck, doesn't really all the time feel like it's in every match. This felt like for some reason it is, and maybe that's because the threats are really powerful. But we all have some conjectures about that later, I'm sure.
Yeah, I thought it's like fine. Like it sort of felt generally on the same wavelength as like other decks I've played in Modern, like where you want to get your mana engine online, you want to cast big threats, you can provide resource denial, you can go over the top. This is just Tron. Isn't it? This is just Tron. It's a different flavor of Tron. This
is the anti-Tron.
Yeah, I don't think it's like Tron.
This is the midrange that you play when you want to beat Tron.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm saying like it's. I do agree with Dave. It has like some prison-y elements, but besides like some Magus of the Moon sort of early plays, I didn't really feel like I was doing anything sort of broken-ish. Like I'm not getting like a lock. I liked doing some mana denial with Pillage for sure.
Yeah. Dude, I played 2 Glorybringers on turn 3 in one game with this deck.
Wow.
Sounds good.
Yeah. I lost. We'll talk about that later. But I did play 2 Glorybringers on turn 3. It seems like it would have been good enough. Maybe part of the reason I love this is because the first league I did with it, I got a 4-1, which was sweet. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. So I decided to do a prelim for the first time ever. And I streamed a bunch of it, which was pretty fun on last Friday night. Might try it again. Sometimes it was late. It was late at night. I streamed until about 1 a.m. Central Time. It was fun. Mickey, I believe from our Slack was there. I never know what people's Twitch names versus their Slack names are.
Yeah, it's the hardest.
But I got a 2-3 in the prelim, unfortunately, but that was very close as well. It was fun. It was a lot of fun to play.
And that was your first prelim, right? Since they introduced that?
First prelim ever. Yeah, I don't think have any of us done a prelim before?
Not yet. I've been waiting for the podcast to pay for mine.
Totally worth it. We'll expense approved.
Thanks, Dave.
Modern prelims are Friday nights at 9 p.m.
Yeah, I like the deck too. I've actually been playing it for a few weeks. I mean, I didn't necessarily have to twist your arms, but like I was kind of hoping we would get to talk about it on the show one day. I suggested it last week. You guys were on board. I was delighted. And now I'm delighted to hear that you generally had positive experiences playing with it. But let's talk about what the deck is doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems kind of out of character for you to like this deck, I guess, in some ways. It's definitely a different axis for Stan in a lot of ways. I did want to recognize, too, that, about 6 weeks ago, you were like, guys, you need to keep an eye on Ponza. It's starting to happen.
Oh, yeah, I could tell. I mean, it was starting to pop up more in the leagues then, though it wasn't like even on page 1 of MTG Goldfish at the time. But I could just tell, after a few Klothys were cast against me that like this Klothys card is really interesting. It feels like this deck has the potential to do some powerful stuff. I started tweaking it. People made fun of me a little bit. Then smarter players started tweaking it and it started doing even better. So Ponza's cool. Let's talk about why.
Yep.
What's this deck trying to do? If you've never heard of Ponza, at its heart, this is a resource denial-based mid-range strategy. Whether it's destroying lands or casting a Blood Moon effect, that tends to be the DNA of Ponza decks, especially in recent history.
Can I throw out a little comparison for you? Imagine if you took Pillage and Magus of the Moon and set them aside and replaced them with Thoughtseize and Inquisition of Kozilek. Like, that's sort of the difference in a lot of ways in the seed of this deck between like hand disruption, hand denial that's in Jund, and resource denial and ramp that's in this deck, right?
I guess, though, you can never cast a turn 1 Pillage or Blood Moon in this deck.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but you don't, for lands, that's not particularly fair, but it's more like, you know, one of them goes by an axis where they try to take out people's threats in their hands, and the other one goes in this axis where they try to take out threats that are on the board that are usually permanent, right?
Yeah. Right. And, you know, in addition to this type of interactive plan, the deck often has some kind of ramp strategy as well. Generally with the overall goal of casting big threats ahead of curve. So we'll go into the cards for each of these components in various sections, but it plays a lot like a mid-range strategy in my mind for a couple of reasons. A, the deck doesn't have a particularly fast line to lethal. Like, I don't think you can Goldfish a turn 4, turn 5 kill. Turn 5, maybe?
Turn 5 for sure.
Yeah, it definitely does not, you know, fly past the opposing defenses.
I mean, Glorybringer does, but...
That's fair. You know, similar to some other mid-range strategies, I think it does actually want to spend as much mana each turn as possible. You know, this didn't feel to me like the type of deck that rewards you holding up your interaction. In some cases, because a lot of that interaction is at sorcery speed. So instead, you sort of chug along a bit in turns 1 or 2 to set up your mana. Then you build up some amount of tempo by taking your opponents down on resources. And eventually you win by producing threats that are hard to deal with, especially if your opponents might have fewer lands to tap. So I found that a lot of games I was winning with 3 or 4 permanents on the board, kind of swinging for lethal. Mm-hmm. Not a traditional go wide deck, but it's not a very narrow go tall deck either.
Yeah.
So how does this happen? It all begins with those early mana acceleration spells, Arbor Elf and Utopia Sprawl.
Mm-hmm. Classic combo.
I mean, actually, starting to be the seed of a whole bunch of other different decks too, right? Like, I mean, you've seen the Planeswalker Prison deck that Aspiring Spike put together, and that, you know, we talked about Lawson Zandy, who piloted that to the championship of our little tournament that we had a couple of weeks ago. You definitely see Arbor Elf and Utopia Sprawl in this kind of powerful engine. And here's how it works, right? What you do is Utopia Sprawl is an enchantment, an aura that says enchant forest. It costs a single green mana, and it says as Utopia Sprawl enters the battlefield, choose a color. Whenever Enchanted Forest is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional 1 mana of the chosen color. And its best friend is Arbor Elf. And Arbor Elf is a 1/1 elf that costs a single green mana. And it says tap, untap, target forest. So it's a little bit of a riff on Llanowar elves in the sense that, you know, you get to untap a land instead of it generating a mana, but that allows you to do things like go into a play where you can generate 4 mana on turn 2. And that's the kind of best case scenario, but you can definitely do crazier things like that. As I said, I generated 10 mana on turn 3, and that happened through a Utopia Sprawl, 3 Arbor Elves, and just hitting my land drops. But it happened.
Yeah, the little best practice there is if you have Utopia Sprawl and Arbor Elf in your hand, if you play your turn 1 elf, turn 2, you play another land, tap that one to enchant your untapped forest, tap your enchanted forest, untap it with elf, tap it again, and you have a turn 2 Chandra.
Yep, which is still breaking. Like, it's pretty backbreaking to play against a turn 2 Chandra. It's just hard to keep up with. Very good card. So I think the thing to think about here, the big decision is if you have both of these in your hand, like Stan said, that's the best case scenario. You should really look at what your game plan is when you're doing this, though, because there are many times where if you don't have a 4 mana threat for turn 2, maybe it's okay for you to play it a little bit more safe and keep your Arbor Elf back until you get some removal out of your opponent's hands, or until you can use it in a way that keeps them from killing it. The flip side to that is that, you just want to be safe and not get your elves exposed to decks that have a lot of removal with them, because people know to kill the Arbor Elf as soon as possible.
Yeah, I frequently was playing like that turn 1 elf and just planning on untapping and Utopia Sprawling and just like, please don't kill my elf. Please don't kill my elf. But the payoff is just so good.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is good to be able to cast 2-3 drops on turn 3, for example. You can kind of make happen sometimes with that, or you get to put a single Glorybringer out if you're lame, unlike me, who can do 2 on turn 3. Like that's all good too, because there are 5 drops that are powerful in this deck as well.
Compared to some other turn 1 mana plays, like such as Noble Hierarch or Birds of Paradise, do you think these are better or worse top decks on average later in the game than something like Hierarch?
I don't think they're much better in any way, because one issue that I have with this deck that I'll be talking about more later as we go through things, it doesn't really have any mana sinks, which was mildly surprising to me. So like if you suddenly get access to more mana options, like with Utopia Sprawl or something like that, it's not exactly game breaking. Whereas like if you had a Devotion style deck or something with like Karwin the Great Creator or a Walking Ballista, and you're like, oh man, I have so much mana now, I get to do something bonkers. I didn't feel like that. I felt like I was restricted by the cards that I was drawing off the top versus having access to like powerful, weird wishboard options or something.
Yeah, I mean, you still don't want to draw a Noble Hierarch on turn 6 in Humans, right? Like that's not really generally going to get you there. Sometimes it'll buff your Mantis Rider, but yeah, so I think that these are around the same as top decking another Mana Dork somewhere else, although I do think that there are some instances where you might be in that kind of like turn 5, turn 6, turn 7 area where you get another Arbor Elf and you're like, oh, now I can play a Seasoned Pyromancer and then also play whatever cards I get off of the Seasoned Pyromancer, or play a 3-drop and activate the activated ability of the Seasoned Pyromancer in my graveyard. So there are a couple of places where you can all of a sudden want to use a whole bunch of mana, but I do think that Shane is kind of right that sometimes I would have access to 9 mana and have nothing to do with it.
I think one reason why these cards may have a little bit of an edge over a random top deck Birds of Paradise in a vacuum is they can potentially help you get to that 7 colors devotion requirement of a card we're going to talk about very shortly.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely true. Let's talk about the big level up with Utopia Sprawl.
Yeah.
If you try Ponza and you learn one thing from listening to us, do not put Utopia Sprawl on a stomping ground.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Unless
you absolutely have to.
Or you've taken all of your Blood Moon effects out of your main deck.
Yes.
Yeah, then it doesn't matter. But the Blood Moon, Mages of the Moon, will make Utopia Sprawl fall off of your stomping ground, and that is just extremely detrimental to your plan. It basically 0 for 1s you. So
yeah.
I did that once. I was like, how bad did that look on the other side? Probably pretty bad.
You did it only once?
I've done it a bunch of times, yeah.
Yeah. I do it daily.
You guys want to move on to some turn 2 and turn 3 mid-game stuff?
Yeah, I mean, when you are ramping, you got to have payoffs, right?
So let's head into what we're ramping into, right? Because that's the goal of ramp, is cast something cooler than turn 2 on your turn 2. We want to get some 3 mana drops on our turn 2. So the premier one that I think people would associate most with a Ponza style deck is like a Blood Moon effect. And right now, Magus of the Moon is much more popular than Blood Moon. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it's because it adds to your beatdown plan, but
I think there's 2 things. One is force negation.
Mm-hmm.
You can't force a negation a Magus of the Moon. And then, yeah, it gets to attack. But I think it's mostly against, Moon is very good against Bant control, or at least it used to be before Astrolabe became a thing. But that's what I would say.
I also think one more factor is it's quite a lot better in multiples than a regular Blood Moon, and sometimes you're just rolling the dice with your Blood Raid Elf, and getting a random Magus of the Moon is a lot better than getting a random Blood Moon.
Great point.
Sure, yeah.
So that's the big one, though, is like the Mondo combo, of course, is I'm going to ramp into Blood Mooning you as fast as possible when you don't see it coming.
Ramping into a pillage, however, is definitely not that bad, especially on the play, and they're running perhaps a more greedy mana base with lots of different colors, lots of shock lands, things like that. Pillage is just a sorcery. You destroy a target artifact or a land, it can't be regenerated. So you just zap their land. Hopefully it's a multicolor land, so you get a little bit extra value there.
Yeah, and here's the other thing it's good at. It gets rid of Aether Vial. It gets rid of Amulets of Vigor.
Yeah, that's the one.
It gets rid of a, let's say, a Mox Amber or a Construct. But those first two things I mentioned are actually part of the reason that I think Pillage is really good right now, is because you get a chance to take Titan off of a plan they thought was secure, or you get a chance to take Humans off of a plan, or any Vial deck off of a plan they thought was secure. So,
yeah, like the primary game plan of I'm going to hurt my opponent's mana base is great, but sometimes it's not what you need to be doing, or it's too late and you're not really stymieing them, and getting an important artifact is certainly important.
Yeah, the fail state is so nice here, because even if they don't have artifacts, they probably have a land.
One or two.
Yeah.
This deck also has a new card that's slotted very conveniently into the plan. We mentioned her already, and that's Klothys, God of Destiny, a new inclusion from Theros Beyond Death. And that is Klothys, a 1 red-green legendary enchantment creature god, indestructible. As long as your devotion to red and green is less than 7, Klothys is not a creature. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, exile target card from a graveyard, so that's any graveyard. If it was a land card, you may add red or green mana to your mana pool. Otherwise, you gain 2 life, and Klothys deals 2 damage to each opponent. When she is anthropomorphized, she's a 4/5.
This card is bananas.
Love this card. Shout out to Dave for pointing out this card in your Sleeve Believe Heave. Or no, it was your
Theros spoiler.
clicks to pick. Yeah, Theros spoiler. Yeah.
So let's talk about why she's good in this deck, because I don't think that Klothys is always going to be in every Gruul deck until the end of time. But why is she specifically good in here in this mid-range deck?
I have many thoughts.
Give me those thoughts, Stanislav.
Well, first off, activating her mana engine is very, very easy in Modern. This deck is running, I think, 10 fetches, if not more. So it's not unusual for you to have a turn 1 fetch. So even if you're casting Klothys on turn 2, as soon as you untap with her, she's producing extra mana.
Yeah, and that can be huge if you want to go turn 2 Klothys, turn 3 5-drop. And Klothys can help you do that. So turn 3 5-drop?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, turn 3 5-drop. Yep.
So that's one. Against a lot of other decks, she's a clock, even when she's not a creature. The fact that if they have any non-land card in their graveyard or in yours, you're not flashing anything back from your graveyard. You're not really using your graveyard for any kind of value besides Klothys. Every turn, you're essentially moving the advantage by 4 life points by draining them for 2 and gaining 2 for yourself.
Yeah, and both halves of that are so huge because they make such a difference in different matchups, right? So you're playing against Burn. You don't really care about the damage clause on Klothys as much. You just want to survive. So you really care about the life gain clause. Other decks where you are getting a little bit of pressure on them, like a control deck, you don't really care about gaining life, but the 2 damage is very nice on an indestructible permanent. So it becomes this kind of interesting thing where you kind of use all the parts of the legendary enchantment god.
Not to mention how important graveyards are in general.
Yeah.
You know, against a deck that's running Uro or whatever that other card is, Kroxa, they become almost uncastable if you've had a turn 2 Klothys. I mean, they can cast it from their hand, but they're never getting it back out of the graveyard.
Yeah. I mean, that part is just gravy, but it's very, very tasty and important gravy.
Yeah, how about Dredge?
Yep.
Still pretty popular deck. Here's your turn, your game 1 Dredge Hate, which is usually bad. But in this deck, it's good.
I managed to keep Storm's graveyard empty for long enough with Klothys as well. And that's really surprising because they can really fill up their graveyard, but you get to pick which card you want to get rid of. So if you're just kind of sitting there and you're like, I'll get rid of whatever's there until there's a Manamorphose, and then I'll get rid of all your Manamorphoses, like that becomes a real thing as well.
I felt like I maybe made a mistake here playing is because there was frequent times when I was like, I don't really see why I need more mana advantage here. I'm not really attacking their graveyard. What's Klothys doing for me when I have these sideboard cards that might be better, or my other cards are attacking more easily? And maybe that was a mistake. Like maybe Klothys is just so flexible that she needs to stay in.
If it didn't have the 2 damage, it would be a little bit more difficult. But just sitting there and taking somebody down while you kind of hold down the board is gigantic.
Sure.
You could do 6 to 8 damage with it without it ever attacking. And that's totally fine.
That's a life swing too.
Yeah, I would never, ever side out Klothys, I don't think.
I never did either. It was just always a great draw at any point of the game. If it was in my opening hand, I was happy. If I top decked it, I was thrilled. Unless maybe I already had one on the board, then I can understand why they would be kind of redundant. But there are ways to deal with these redundant legendary spells as well.
Yeah.
Well, as Dave said, my old friend Klothys, she's here.
Yeah.
Can we just agree right now, Klothys is probably the best card in this deck, and it's more or less one of the reasons why this deck is so good right now.
I definitely think it's one of the reasons. It's one of the main reasons the deck is so good right now. I think it might be the most powerful thing here. I'm not 100% sure because there's a lot going on, but Klothys wouldn't be half as good without the engine. You know what I mean? But it's really good.
I mean, it's a preeminent mid-range card, right? In that it's giving you more mana. It's giving you a graveyard hate when you need it. It's giving you life gain swings just by sitting there. And then late game, it turns into a gigantic beater that's extremely challenging to remove. So those are all things you want to be doing. So it fits into the strategy of the deck without being really detrimental in any way.
Yeah. All right. I want to talk about one last ramp target. Maybe the last card that I would consider one of the ramp targets in this for real as far as turn 2 goes. Although I guess there's 2 of them. Chandra, Torch of Defiance. I think everybody knows what Chandra does. Pluses to let you look at a card and do some damage. It can give you some extra mana. It can kill a creature. It can emblem, but that doesn't often happen here. Chandra does a little bit of everything, right? And the ramp, I think, is particularly useful in this deck, depending on what you want to do with it. But really, this is about that flexibility to have a removal spell or a draw spell or a little clock or some ramp in one card. And I think comparing it to Klothys is nice in that way. This is just a little bit more powerful in some ways. Though there's only 2 in the deck in the build that we played, and I don't think I would want more of those where I definitely want a full boat of Klothys.
Yes. And this is one of the cuts from the companion version of Ponza, which we'll talk about in a little bit too.
There's a companion version of this deck?
Believe it.
Oh gosh. Okay. We better get through this quick.
I mean, one thing that's really important about Chandra is she's one of the only ways you're going to get card advantage in this deck besides like Bloodbraid Elf.
Seasoned Pyromancer.
Yeah, Seasoned Pyromancer. I mean, that's why these cards, I think, are so essential to the deck and why losing out on Chandra in the companion version, I'll talk about later. Whoa, Dave's shaking his head at me.
It did not matter. Spoiler. Has not mattered to me so far. But let's go on.
Yeah, Seasoned Pyromancer, you probably know what it does. 1 RR for a 2/2. When it enters, you discard 2, then draw 2 cards. If some of the cards you discarded were non-land permanents, you make 1/1 elementals. And here's another ability that I really loved in this deck, especially 3 RR, exile Seasoned Pyromancer from your graveyard, create 2 1/1 red elemental creature tokens.
Helpful.
There's your mana sink, in my opinion, especially when the deck has 4 of these.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a mana sink, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's not super powerful, but it's super useful in the sense that I didn't often attack with the tokens, but I very, very frequently use them to buy me time
Totally.
to be able to swing back with a Glorybringer or an animated Klothys or both, which was kind of a play that happens a lot, I think, in this deck, where it's like I don't have enough devotion for Klothys, and then I'll play Glorybringer, and now I'm suddenly attacking for 8 quote unquote haste damage and killing one of your creatures. So it's awesome. I mean, it's a powerful card. I think it's very at home in this deck. It's probably the best deck that I've seen this card in, the most useful version of it in a lot of ways. Being able to cycle the payoffs, being able to just draw extra cards is great. Yeah, I think the card is really, really good.
Yeah, I just like the card because it's like you said, it's one of your only sources of card advantage. And so I just love casting it when my hand is empty and just getting 2 fresh draws. And I think you really need to be refilling your hand with this deck because you have to frequently mulligan to get your engine pieces. So you're usually down like a card or 2, and you're hoping to make up for that with the power level of the cards you're playing early to mid game, right? But then you're like, well, I need some more cards, and Spyro gives you those. And because those early plays are not great long game value, like your early game engine is like your Elf and your Utopia Sprawl, and they sort of lose some value as the game progresses to the end game, and that's when you need to be drawing into some gas as your payoff, right? And I was comparing it sort of mentally to humans, where like my turn 1 Champion of the Parish or my turn 2 Thalia's Lieutenant can end up being this gigantic end game threat, but a turn 1 Utopia Sprawl is always just that Utopia Sprawl. So if you don't have ways to be drawing into more gas, then you're kind of out of luck.
Yeah.
I like casting this card just because he's handsome and ripped.
That's fair.
But everyone has their reasons to like Magic cards.
Absolutely. I think that Seasoned Pyromancer is interesting because it sort of moves from being a ramp target into some cards that are kind of utility-ish that are in the deck. So I think there's 2 cards in particular that we could talk about really quickly that are utility-style cards. For me, the first one in this particular build is Scavenging Ooze. It runs, the build that we did ran a couple in the main deck. I think it's nice. It's a nice tool. You know, it's really Green's best 2-drop in a lot of ways when you can't play Tarmogoyf. And so being able to have a Scooz there, do mess with people's graveyards in your main deck, potentially grow a giant threat because you do have some creatures around in this deck that you can eat with it, lets it fill that kind of gap where sometimes it's a threat. Often it's just a good utility card that people have to spend some removal on and not kill your elves with or something like that because they're relying on the graveyard. The second card I would throw into this utility slot is Bone Crusher Giant, which I think is good in this deck, and it's kind of a safety valve where it's like either a threat or a shock. But there aren't a ton of things that you always want to kill in Modern with a 2 CMC shock, especially off the top of the deck late game. And so it's nice to have that 4/3 come out of it as well. But I just think this is a good card to have access to. I felt like I sideboarded it out a lot personally, but same thing with Scooz here and there, depending on what the game plan was looking like. But they're great cards to have in the main deck pre-board.
Yeah, it's not like Bone Crusher Giant is as good in Modern as I think he is in Pioneer, because you're getting a lot less for your money in Modern, right? You're getting like a 2-mana shock and then a 3-mana 4/3. And it's great to have the ability to use your mana like that, but it's not necessarily worth the card in the 60.
Yeah, I mean, it's also card advantage. Because, ideally, Bone Crusher Giant's a 2-for-1. And so it's a source of red card advantage that you can play. It just felt like it's one of the worst cards in the deck to me, and I often use those slots for something else later. So why don't we talk about, after covering kind of the utility slots, the way that we could kind of close out the game. Stan, what do you think about those cards?
Yeah, they're beautiful. They're Glorybringers. 3 red for a flying, hasty 4/4 dragon that exerts as it attacks.
You may.
Yeah, but even if it doesn't have a target, I always exert to send a message. And when you do, it deals 4 damage to a target non-dragon creature an opponent controls, which is most of the creatures in Modern.
True.
So in this deck, it's usually a like your turn 3 play, sometimes your turn 4 play.
Yeah.
I wish I got this out on 3. I never had this out on 3, no.
I cast 2 of them on 3. You guys hear about that?
Oh, whoa.
Wait, you did?
I must have missed that.
I'll tell you about that game in a little bit. It was wild. Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing about this card is like, you don't actually, I felt like I didn't often get to kill something with the triggered ability, so I wasn't exerting it all the time. Frequently, I was just using this as something to try to put some pressure on and just holding back the trigger for later. Where I think in Pioneer, a lot of times when I cast Glorybringer, it was like, I am immediately going to kill something every time and let it sit there. Sometimes I'm just like, all right, it's time for me to turn on Klothys and attack with Glorybringer and just kind of like finish this game. But good that it kills creatures. You don't always need it though in Modern.
Yeah, I find that often by the time I'm casting this, it's also just animating my Klothys too.
Yeah.
Like often this was like the last piece I needed to have 3 bodies on the board.
Yeah.
I didn't love this card. I felt like it was somewhat slow against the fast decks, even though I'm probably not thinking quite correctly when I was playing, because it is a ramp deck, so you want to be casting it fairly early. But even turn 4, it's like, so what am I doing? I'm turn 4, I'm casting a 4/4 flying haster that can hopefully take out a creature that they played, and that's good value. But then there is the tempo loss of the exertion for sure. That does happen. So I don't know, is this really the ultimate 5-drop for this deck? Like, I'm probably wrong. Like, everyone's running it. What are the other options we have here?
Well, I will say they weren't running it a few months ago in the earlier builds of Ponza. But, I think that you saw things like Stormbreath Dragon sometimes, and you saw
Inferno Titan.
You can still see Inferno Titan, absolutely. I don't know, Stan, what do you think about this? Is this a replaceable thing and something that's good right now, or?
I actually find that exerting it is relevant more often than not. I have to say, and from my experience playing this deck for like a couple weeks, there's a lot of creatures out there where dealing 4 damage is actually super relevant. The Dryad of the Elysian Grove, Urza, the list goes on. But I like that, unlike Stormbreath Dragon, this just does both.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the pro white on Stormbreath isn't quite as relevant as I think it used to be.
Especially as relevant as the kill a creature thing. I think that's totally fair.
Sure. I could totally see this card eventually being replaced by something that is either 4 mana and just giving you like as much value at a better rate. But it served a purpose really nicely. And I think you almost can't evaluate this as a 5 mana creature. Like, I think if this were a 3 mana creature, it would be just insane and more people would run it outright. And I think even at 4 mana, it's totally respectable because can be a 2-for-1.
Yeah, you definitely named the 2 most necessary targets for it there. Dryad of the Elysian Grove and Urza.
Yeah.
All right, so it's time to tell you about the game where I cast 2 of them on turn 3 and lost. So that was against Titan deck, actually. And the way that the sequencing worked out, they had a Dryad out on their turn 3. I was on the draw, and my draw had been like, I went turn 1 Elf, turn 2 Utopia Sprawl into Elf, and then went turn 3 land drop, tap on tap, tap on tap, tap on tap, tap on tap, made 10 mana, made 2 Glorybringers, killed their Dryad of the Elysian Grove, but they still had enough mana to ramp out into a Titan. And then I just lost the race because they killed me with their giant Titan before I could get my Glorybringers untapped fast enough to kill them. Brutal.
Hey, Dave, sometimes it do be like that.
I know, it was rough. I thought that I had him for sure. And let me tell you, I thought for a long time about whether I was going to kill the Dryad in that situation or not. Because I was like, okay, like what's going to happen if I let them keep this and just try to beat them down faster than they do stuff? And what I realized is that when they bring out their Titan, they can just get Valakut and kill one of my Glorybringers. So I have to kill the Dryad.
That's a good kind of, sort of level up point, Dave, is just because you can kill something doesn't mean you always should, because you have to take a turn off.
Right.
And like if you're in a vaguely racing situation, then they better have a really potent threat on the ground for you to not be able to untap and deal 4 in the air again.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I frequently used the exert trigger for was to clear the board for Klothys or even Arbor Elves and Seasoned Pyromancers to swing in for some extra points of damage as well. So that's key too, is like getting that blocker out of the way.
Moving on, there are a couple more staple cards in this deck. Until maybe this past weekend, 4 Bloodbraid Elf was more or less stock. Just a great mid-range card and super powerful in this deck since it basically lets you cast anything you find except for Glorybringers. And of course, 4 Lightning Bolt.
Yeah. Both of those I do consider closers in this build of the deck because of the haste on Bloodbraid Elf and because I bolted people to death a lot. With this, I would try to hold the ground with my creatures and then turn it at their face if I could turn the lightning bolt off their face, or try to hold back on killing a creature unless I absolutely had to, because the reach is nice. Having that little bit of reach off of lightning bolt super helpful.
There are also just a small handful of cards that are in a flex slot. Right now we're seeing Skoos and Bonecrusher Giant. In the past, people would play things like Hex Drinker, sometimes Wrenn and Six sees play, as well as Questing Beast will occasionally see play as one of the closers.
If I play more of this deck, I definitely want to test out some QBs over maybe a Glorybringer or two. It might be wrong. I'm fine being wrong. I think if blue-white control were more around, it's the type of thing that you definitely would want those questing beasts in there because they're just planeswalker killers. Hex Drinker is definitely a card I would want to test in this deck. Again, like I've been banging this drum, I want something to sink my mana into. I want something to be able to do with my mana when I'm out of cards. And leveling up a Hex Drinker is a very good thing to do.
Yeah.
The problem with Questing Beast in particular, Shane, is that it's not good with any of the companions that this deck would play.
Yep, that's the issue.
Wait, there's already a companion version of this deck?
Dave, are you sitting down?
I'm sitting down.
There is a companion version of this deck. And the companion that we played with, including you, which you probably forgot now.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Was Obosh, the Prey Piercer.
The mighty Obosh, my favorite BBC show.
Obosh, the Prey Piercer is 3 black-red hybrid mana. Legendary Hellion Horror. Hellion Horror. Your starting deck contains only cards with odd CMC and land cards. Is the companion clause. And the upside, because all of these cards are good, if a source you control with an odd CMC would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. And it's a 3/5.
Dave, I know you like lightning bolts. How about a 6 damage lightning bolt?
Oh, yeah. Now we're talking. How about Klothys does 4 damage now with its triggered ability? How about Glorybringer does 8 damage at haste speed flying?
Mm-hmm.
That's a spicy meatball.
I'll say.
Hey, guys, do you know which Pokemon this one reminds me of?
Obosh.
In terms of mechanics or like the look?
Entirely aesthetically.
Obosh. Okay, I'm looking at Obosh. Is this like a new Pokemon? Is this an old Pokemon? Is this like from like Red Blue, or is this like one of those newfangled like Diamond Sapphires or something?
Is Pinhead a Pokemon?
Shane, you're so good. It's actually from the era of Pearl and Diamond, and it's called Giratina. It's a legendary dragon ghost from another dimension. It's the antagonist of space and time.
Well, Obosh is definitely going to be antagonizing some people. And also, yeah, Obosh is truly horrifying art for sure.
Yeah.
Looks like a tremor. It's like a tremor millipede.
Yeah, no one liked my Clive Barker reference a minute ago. We'll just keep going.
Hey, I love the first 2 Hellraiser movies, man.
They're super weird. They're all super weird.
So to meet the companion clause, you have to trade off some cards from your main deck. And those are Chandra, Bloodbraid Elf, Scavenging Ooze, and some potential sideboard cards, which are like Collector Oof, Cindervines, and maybe even a Braid. But it does replace those cards with other cards that are odd CMC. And I don't think we're really going to dwell on the companion version for very long, but you may encounter it, so we'll tell you which cards people may be running, because they can be a little surprising. The first one especially, and that's Domri, Anarch of Bolas. a War of the Spark Planeswalker, 1 red-green with the static ability that creatures you control get +1/+0.
Not bad with tokens.
Not bad at all. Also +1, add red or green, and creatures spells you cast this turn can't be countered. So you don't even have to use the mana to get that ability. Just any creature spell you cast.
Yep.
Also -2, target creature you control fights target creature you don't control, and it starts with 3 loyalty.
I gotta ask, wouldn't Domri Raid be better than Domri Anarchabolus in a deck where you want to be drawing cards? To me, like I just want to be able to get more butts onto the board.
I think the cool thing about this Domri is the plus to add mana and the minus to remove creatures. I guess Domri Raid has that same minus, but I actually found, especially now considering how like Bant Snow is still quite popular and like everyone's running Archmage's Charms and Cryptic Command Loop sometimes, making your really important closers uncounterable was actually really relevant when I played this version of the deck, even this weekend, which was, companion capital of the world.
Mm-hmm. So maybe, but
that was my personal experience.
Yeah. I'm not sold on either one. I keep thinking about ways to keep my flow of cards going, and I might be overvaluing that.
I will, like, just to make it clear, I don't think it's worth playing this version of the deck because you get Domri. Like, Domri is a concession you make because you get potentially a much more powerful card, which is Obosh.
Yeah, I'm just curious if like there's a different concession could be made, and I'm sure this is very early, so people will make this a little bit more tuned soon.
Yeah, Domri's plus is not very good. Domri Red's plus is not very good. I mean, think about how often that bricks. It's just look at it and you get to keep it if it's a creature. That's what, like a 1 out of 3 shot? That's not good. That's not as good as ramping.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, some of the changes to the sideboard, it's got a couple of Thrashing Brontodons in the list that we saw and played with. Kitchen Finks, which I actually found fine. I got paired against Burn and it was A-okay.
How long has that card been good? Forever.
Yeah, when in doubt, just throw a Kitchen Finks in there. And, of course, Veil of Summer, which this deck traditionally wasn't running, and now it kind of has to.
Amazing for me in several matchups where I've played this version.
Well, it's an amazing card, Dave.
Yeah, love it.
I know Dave played Obosh. Shane, did you get a chance?
Oh, yeah. My last 3 matches were all with Obosh.
What'd you guys think of your new Hellion companion? You have to love him.
He knows if you don't.
Is he like your
knows.
friend or is he like your son, as Ryan Overturf talked about Bedlam Reveler on the Prowess episode?
This is your roommate that buys you wine coolers. Mm-hmm. Gives you the headache from hell.
What do you think, Dave? You compared them, I think, more than I did.
I thought it was very powerful. Like, I mean, it was immediately clear to me that companion mechanic is good after I got a chance to play a single match with this, where I suddenly could just drop this card on turn 5 and all of my threats do double damage is insane. It's unbelievable. And the thing is, like, that effect exists, right? There's a flash enchantment that I think does the same thing for 5 CMC from old Theros block. I think it's called Perforos something. And it's this is so much better because it's a creature. You always have it. You now don't have to run it in your deck. You never draw it.
It's kind of hard to kill too.
Yeah, and this card is hard to kill. Like a 5 toughness creature is not the easiest thing in the world to kill in Modern in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree. This card is really impressive. And sometimes it was impressive to me after I failed to cast it, because what I think this card added to the deck in my admittedly small sample size was the actual I win button, where there would be certain games where my opponents would tap out and it would be like turn 5 or 6 and I happen to have a couple creatures on the board and I cast Obosh and I just swing with everything and deal like 16 damage on the spot.
Yeah.
It also, if you have Obosh and Klothys out, the Klothys triggered ability of draining and gaining does damage. So Klothys now pinks for 4.
Yeah. That's what Dave was talking about earlier. It's crazy.
Brutal.
This reminds me a lot of how I play mono red and how you sort of build your game plan in mono red and standard around Torbran. And I mentioned that earlier, and this is just a lot better than Torben in a lot of ways because the double damage is insane. It's a larger creature than Torben itself. So like when you have a clear board, if you've stabilized and you remove their creatures and you stick your Obosh, you're swinging for 6.
Yeah.
Which is incredible. And like you said, it has a bigger toughness with a 5. And all of your lightning bolts are awesome with a Torben, with an Obosh out rather. I mean, they're good with a Torben too, but they're better with an Obosh. So
the other thing I would point out that's interesting here too is that it deals double damage on blocking as well. And that actually came up for me a couple of times where I was a little bit behind. People were attacking into me and I could do some advantageous blocks and kind of clear their board and then have some guys left to swing in. I mean, I think in one match I sacrificed my Obosh to, I think it was a giant Titan. I was like, all right, go on and swing in. You're going to lose the Titan in this exchange as well. And that managed to let my Glorybringers finish off the game on the other side. So
what's crazy about the companion part of Obosh, and I'm sure we'll talk about this next week more when we get some more reps with companion decks under our belts, is you're going to have this card when you want it. So you can develop your entire game plan and the way you play your cards out and what you keep for later around Obosh. So you can be like, well, I could cast this lightning bolt right now and remove this creature, or I could just sandbag it for when I play my Obosh and just win with it because I can just deal 6 to their dome. So it changes the way you race. It changes the way you remove opposing creatures. It changes the way you sequence your spells in like a really interesting way. And yeah, it's powerful.
I hate to say it, for as much time as we spent talking about the non-companion version of this deck, I think that principles apply, of course, from our earlier discussion, but I do think that this version is probably better in general because of what Stan talked about, which is that it is an I win button that you get to control when you want it to come into play.
I think we might find that to be true after we've had a little bit more time to kind of like develop the deck and kind of tweak it, because there were cards that just felt iffy, including Domri for that matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the Torben example, like if anyone playing an aggressive red deck could cast Torben from their sideboard at any time, they would adore that card. It would be an absurd card, and that's essentially what this is.
Yeah, I mean, we saw in the Pioneer tournament that we looked at that people were playing Obosh in mono red aggro decks in the sideboard. Just change your game plan.
All right, guys, we've played this deck. We've been making fun of it for years. And now we're the bad guys. Why do you think this deck might be good now?
Tell us why you think it's good.
We're asking.
I think it's Klothys.
Yeah.
Like, full stop. I think Klothys is just a great way to... I mean, I might be borrowing words from one of our previous recent guests, but Klothys kind of shores up some formerly troublesome matchups by like giving you a little bit more game against graveyard decks and a little bit more game against aggro decks. While also the meta, I think, may actually be super ripe right now for what this deck's plans are, which is disrupting people's resources, literally destroying their lands. And, as Dave said, like, sure, we have game against so much of the meta, but like incidental graveyard hate, having a clock that is almost impossible to remove, I think it all kind of boils down into this really nice package of its position is just the best it's ever been. And one other thing I want to mention that I've been thinking about a lot lately with Modern in particular is that until Once Upon a Time was banned, it felt like Modern was completely overrun with these big mana strategies, whether it was some flavor of Primeval Titan or Eldrazi-tron, or maybe even regular Tron, or maybe even Blue Tron. Like, everyone was all about producing as much mana as possible by turn 3. And we've seen a lot of those decks decline, but Ponza is still producing a lot of mana very early. So maybe we're entering or kind of seeing the end of a period where part of the game to be competitive in Modern was figuring out ways to generate as much mana and resources as possible and finding the best payoffs for that. And I think Ponza just happens to be one of those strategies that gets to like play ahead of curve, make a bunch of mana and make those payoffs that are hard for people to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, I think you opened the floor to us to answer that question, but I feel like I can't add anything to what you said. I do think that you kind of nailed the aspects of it that make it the most powerful to me. I think the last thing is just in the companion version, it has access to what I think is going to be one of the most popular companions for people to play, which is Obosh. Mm-hmm. And so when you tie those all up together, I think you really get to something that is quite powerful and I think is going to maintain its position even as this metagame quickly changes given the new cards that are being injected into it from Ikoria. My 2 cents.
Shane, cosign?
I personally...
Do you agree with the premise that the deck is even good right now?
The deck is clearly good right now, but I also am of the opinion that players make decks good in spite of the power level relative to the rest of the format. So what I mean by that is that I think that most good decks in Magic have very small edges. Like we're talking like a few percentage points here and there, right? I think those can be amplified in particular metagames. So if this is good in a field where people are trying to leverage the power of Primeval Titan, then that's going to be a good foil to that strategy. But at the same time, this deck isn't particularly blazing fast. I also think it doesn't have incredible ways to even slow down other very fast decks. Like, sure, it has removal. It has Lightning Bolt, and it typically has some Bone Crusher Giants. But I don't really see how this deck is going to typically beat Infect, for example. Not that Infect is like a tier 1 scourge out there, but I think that this deck has plenty of weaknesses that could be exploited. And I'm sure that the cycle of the metagame will continue to develop. I just don't think that, I don't think Klothys itself is like some card that is so uniquely powerful that is going like a Urza, for example, that is like Urza based decks are continually powerful. I don't know if this deck is like going to be built around the Klothys engine that provides such a unique, powerful ability like a Urza, for example. And I know you're not saying that, but that's kind of like where I'm thinking right now. It seems like a good deck that can exploit certain metagames, but has flaws, which is what you want Magic to be, I think, typically.
Cool. Co-signed. Do you guys want to talk about some of the decks that you think were good matchups for you?
Yeah.
Because I got to say, I was winning some games.
Yeah, me too. I think that the matchup that seemed the best to me was just Burn. It's a Burn and Lands decks, right? Like it's Burn, Lands decks, anything aggro. I felt like, counter to what Shane was saying a moment ago, I felt like I very much was keeping up with aggro decks with this, mostly off of the back of Klothys. Soul Herder decks I did okay against in a weird way. Unfortunately, I had to play those multiple times. I'm still totally not sure how I beat them, but it was very, very difficult.
Interesting. I actually had a little bit of success against Dredge. I would say this is the best game 1 I've ever had against Dredge with any of the decks that I've enjoyed playing.
And that's off the back of Scavenging Ooze and Klothys.
Yeah, it's entirely Klothys. Skoos was a nice addition, but even before I was playing the Skoos version, I thought Klothys was just so good because sometimes the Dredge player has a really bad Dredge, and it often will be if you play Klothys on turn 2 and they have one bad Dredge, you can really start punishing them. I also beat Infect. I found Infect and some of these low to the ground, small, fast creature decks, with the exception of Bogles, were really easy to deal with. David mentioned Burn, but I think Prowess fell into that as well.
Yeah. Prowess actually had a little bit of a trickiness with because it has trample. It can give trample with crash through, and so I had a little bit of scary moments from that. The thing I would say about playing against Infect is that this deck has main deck answers to Inkmoth Nexus,
exactly,
which is pretty nice and helpful. And then you got your bolts, and you got your Glorybringers that you can rev into, and you got Chandra that can kill an infect creature no problem. So there's enough answers, I think, to that kind of strategy. You can't always interact with them at instant speed, but you can do a lot on your turn to get in the way of a deck like that.
I'll take the infect side of this matchup every time, though.
Okay. Happy birthday, you're wrong.
You think this is a positive matchup against infect with 4 lightning bolts?
I don't know. Well, I mean, it has 4 lightning bolts, 2 bone crusher giants. You can pillage Inkmoth Nexus.
I really think it's the Blood Moon. I mean, Blood Moon is just one of the best cards against infect in my years of experience casting Blood Moons in my stupid blue-red decks.
Yeah.
I mean, you can fetch up basics as the infect player if you suspect it's coming. It hits Inkmoth for sure.
Yeah.
But, I understand what you're saying. But I do think that it's a big mid-range deck, but I also don't think it necessarily... I think one of the things I hear people saying is like, well, it has land destruction, so it can beat Tron. Mm-hmm. And it has removal and life gain, so it can beat aggro, right? Mm-hmm. And so what's it losing to, do you think?
Urza, for one thing, was pretty tough for me. What do you think, Stan?
Yeah, I think the snow decks were actually pretty hard, unless you had a killer curve into turn 2 Blood Moon while you're on the play, to shut them off of their fetch lands specifically. The fact that all of their lands are basics and they're hitting every land drop, I found that pretty challenging.
And they have Astrolabe.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think combo is really bad against you, or it's really good against you and it's really bad to play against because you're just not fast enough and you don't really have any interaction besides with their lands primarily.
Yeah, I managed to beat Storm with this deck, but I had to have them brick, and I had to have some pretty amazing plays with Veil of Summer. Mm-hmm. I had to Veil of Summer, Gifts Ungiven twice, 2 turns in a row. I had to Veil of Summer against and it got me there.
I kind of feel like this is the type of deck where I hated being against Jund when I was on the draw. Mm-hmm. Early hand disruption I found to be super punishing. And Assassin's Trophy was just great against pretty much everything in my deck except Klothys. So sometimes their Tarmogoyf will get obviously outside of bolt range, but they'll even get outside of Glorybringer range. So I found that kind of hard.
Yeah.
But also, a lot of good mid-range decks, the nut draw will just give you game against pretty much anything in the field. So maybe this deck has no bad matchups.
I don't think that's true. All right. Do we have any parting tips and tricks or final thoughts? My big note that I would give as we kind of talk about where to go with this deck is, again, do not put Utopia Sprawl on your stomping grounds. Don't do it if you have Blood Moon in your deck, because you'll regret it.
Also, Stan, I said I found a big non-bow with Magus of the Moon. I forgot what it was. And you were like, oh yeah, that is a terrible one. It was, Anger of the Gods.
Yeah.
In your sideboard. Don't, it's hard to,
yeah.
That's a uniquely bad combo when you want to be having a Blood Moon effect, but then you also need to wipe a board. So versus humans, perhaps you're well, I can take them off of all their lands, but they already have a little bit of a board, and maybe they have a Noble Hierarch or an Aether Vial, and then you have to anger to try to wipe things, and then you enable all their lands again.
Totally. Mine isn't so much a tip or trick, but it's kind of a question for you guys. Maybe you can share or help me develop a tip or trick. Is Seasoned Pyromancer good to play on turn 2 if you can produce 3 mana? Do you cast it? Do you roll the dice with whatever's in your hand?
That's the type of plan that I would keep if I knew that the cards that I was going to get rid of were things that I felt kind of awkward about. That's where I'm I'm going to get rid of a Glorybringer because I actually don't have a path to casting it early. If I can generate 3 mana, but I don't have a look into land number 3, then I'll definitely be okay, I'm going to ditch Glorybringer and an extra Klothys with Seasoned Pyromancer on turn 2. So I definitely did it sometimes if I needed to turn my hand over. How about mulling?
You got to do it. I think.
Got to do it a lot.
Yeah, Dave, I really liked your heuristic words. You're kind of just mulling toward a way to cast a 3 mana spell on turn 2 and kind of hope that the deck works beyond that.
Yeah. I don't get more aggressive than that. I don't try to make wilder things, but yeah, 3 mana spell on turn 2, you got to do it, I think.
My question here, though, is like, what are you really getting on turn 3 besides the Magus of the Moon or the Pillage? And is that worth it?
Klothys.
I mean, like, is like a turn 3 Klothys really that backbreaking? Like, it doesn't
Turn 2.
Yeah, I mean, is turn 2 Klothys that backbreaking? Do you know what I mean? It's not like
Yes.
it's not that ridiculous of a card.
It's that good. It really is that good. It lets you cast a 5-drop on turn 3 if you make your other land drop, or it buys you a couple of turns with life gain, or it gets rid of their graveyard, their card that's in the graveyard.
Yeah,
I mean, it's really that good.
It also basically never goes away.
Yeah, because
Like, I think that's why it's so good. It's just it's so hard to answer. You almost have to answer it coming down, or like have Path to Exile once it becomes a creature.
like when we were playing Mono Red Prison, like the entire engine of that deck is built around lockout early plays, right? And so you're mulling to those, and that makes a lot more sense to me than mulling to the mana engine that then enables like a hopefully high impact mid game card, or the early game for us, but it's not like immediately stopping the opponent's plan completely outright. It's just like high value because like one more turn is perhaps a 4-point life swing, you know, again, or something like that, or another pip of mana a turn early.
Right.
Which is like it's like less overtly powerful to me.
Well, you know what, Shane? Now you get to play Obosh and just win on the spot. And I think that should be powerful enough for you.
Can we talk a little bit about what people should do against this deck? Because I feel like we talked about how to play this deck, but not really like how you should try to stop our game plan.
Sure. We should kind of breeze through it. We're running low on time. But I think that's an important thing to share.
Yeah.
And Dave sort of mentioned it. Like, if you have an opportunity to kill their turn 1 Arbor Elf, you have to. This is not like the game where it's like, do I kill Birds of Paradise? Do I bolt the bird? I don't know. You have to kill Arbor Elf. Just because they will potentially lock you out if you don't. Or just like cast crazy spells really fast.
I feel like flooding the board is challenging because you only have so much point removal and only so many bodies to block with, and you don't really want to block with your Magus of the Moon. You don't really want to block with your Elf too much.
But you do want to block with Seasoned Pyromancer and the tokens off of it. So there's a little back and forth there, but it's very situational. It depends on the draw that the person gets, because sometimes you can't attack into the board with a lot of extra stuff because you don't know how much they're going to swing back for, because of Bloodbraid Elf and Glorybringer and things like that. So I think you're going to be a little careful with like the go wide attack into everything plan, but it's definitely there.
Let's say you're a player on a Thoughtseize deck against Ponza, and you Thoughtseize them, and you can't like punch a hole, but you have to decide whether you want to maybe take them down on their ramp plan or take them down on payoffs. Which do you think is better?
I mean, I think you take them off of payoffs in this deck, but I don't know. Shane is a more experienced ramp person.
Of course, it depends on what they have, right? Like let's say mulled to 6 and they have like a Utopia Sprawl and an Arbor Elf. You're going to want to stop the mana engine if you have any removal in the future. Like let's say like they can get something online on turn 4, then you're like, yeah, I'm going to Assassin's Trophy that. Mm-hmm. Sweet. I got like 2 mana advantage off of your Chandra or something like that.
Cool.
I think it tends towards payoffs because it is possible in this deck to draw a whole lot of enablers and not enough payoffs.
Yeah, I don't know. I will say that I wish we had more time to play with Obosh, because that felt like kind of a skill testing card for this deck. Like I started to kind of get my sea legs. I stopped putting the Utopia Sprawl on Stomping Grounds, and boom, Companions happened. And I got to play a league and then some with the Companion, and there were like, I gotta say, there was at least 2 games, if not matches, that I could have won if I had only remembered to cast my Companion, to the point where I had to like manipulate my MTGO screen in a way that it looked like the Companion zone was actually in my hand, because otherwise I would just totally forget it was there. And you know, if remembering the Companions are in your Companion zone is part of the balancing act, so be it.
What a trade-off for an 8th card in your hand. Got to remember to use it. That's the deal.
People keep talking about these 8th cards, but sometimes I mulligan.
Yeah, true.
So I got to ask you. I think you guys can tell. I have a little bit of doubt about the long-term tier 1 status of this deck, but it's the most well-performing deck in the meta by a very small margin, according to Goldfish. Do you think that's the case for the immediate future, for the long-term future?
I don't think there's any deck that's going to stay the exact same and good for the long-term future, for the foreseeable future.
Right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think not only is it because Modern is like reasonably dynamic, but as new sets come out and keep adding new toys for different decks, I think we're just going to see maybe even a faster churn within the meta than what we may be used to from like the first half of Modern's history. Like Titan was good. Now it seems to be a little less good. I think Ponza might, a few months from now, like be a little less good. But as long as Klothys is around, like I think it'll still be decent. Certainly LGS legal if LGSs are ever a thing again.
Yeah, I mostly agree in the sense of like the metagame is going to be in a lot of upheaval the next couple of weeks and months potentially because of Companion. And so who knows what's going to happen? There's 10 of these toys to play with that who knows what's going to be the best one at the top of that list right now. I do think that this deck is positioned as well as anything is because it has a good and powerful companion it can play. And that's maybe about the best I can say about it right now.
Listen, this was fun. Whatever happens to Ponza, we'll be here with the breakdown to keep you informed on the latest innovations, trends, strategies in Modern and Pioneer. Why not? But I think for now that wraps up this week's show.
Absolutely.
If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and a review. If you'd like to submit a question to the podcast or pick our brain on something in Modern or Pioneer, you can tweet us at The Dive Down, all one word, or email thedivedown@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can join our Patreon, where joining at any tier gets you access to our super secret Slack channel. Check that out at patreon.com/thedivedown. Of course, shout out to Mana Traders for sponsoring our show. You can sign up for Mana Traders using promo code TheDiveDown, all one word, for 15% off your first 3 months of renting Magic Online cards. And I, for one, have not had any issue renting new cards since they've come out. I know sometimes Mana Traders can be a little slow to get those new cards, but on weekend 1, I was getting the new cards I wanted. I wanted them all.
There's also a loyalty component attached to that to keep in mind. So the longer you've been a subscriber, the earlier you can get cards.
So if you sign up now, you'll be good in the future.
Yeah.
You'll be good by the time the next set rolls around, maybe. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, stay inside and blow up lands. Who's got background music?
You can hear that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Nicole.
I love you, but it sounded like she was watching like war propaganda. Join the Space Navy.
Okay. How's that?
Did you just mute your wife's television remotely? It's great. I can't hear anything.
Okay.
I couldn't hear anything anyway, so